Test check one. We need one more for a quorum, so we'll get started here shortly. There aren't any members of Congress sitting out there, is there? No, I don't see any. Okay, we need one more.
Count me for two.
What's that?
Count me
Yeah,
for two.
count Nydia for two. So. We have a quorum. So good morning. I call the Committee Small Business Budget Views and Estimates meeting to order. Today's first order of business is to consider the views and estimates on the priorities of the Committee on Small Business for fiscal year 2019. Our second order of business is a hearing that will immediately follow this. So members, please remain after this so that we can get into the hearing, which will begin immediately after this. According to Goldman Sachs, the first time since 2010, the world economy is outperforming most predictions. Based on the key economic numbers, the U.S. economy is improving and economic forecasts are strong. In our congressional districts back home, we are hearing from small business owners that they are optimistic about their future. They are seeing fewer regulations from Washington, and they're seeing more dollars on their balance sheets and in their employees' paychecks. And many of us would, at least half of the folks up here would probably argue that's due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The other half would probably dispute that fact. However, small businesses, the core performers of our economy, are still finding it difficult to access much-needed capital. The Small Business Administration, the SBA, and its programs continue to have a vital role in helping small firms expand and grow our economy. The SBA's key functions, assisting small businesses to access capital, providing training and technical assistance, and increasing small business procurement opportunities, are more important than ever. And so it is our job to ensure that the SBA's programs are working efficiently and effectively, and that they're transparent and making the best use of valuable taxpayer dollars. The SBA's first responsibility is to complete the tasks mandated by Congress before it expends funds on its own untested initiatives or entrepreneurial training that duplicates longstanding and proven programs operated by the SBA and its partners, such as the Small Business Development Centers and SCORE. There is no question that our country relies on small businesses. We're a nation of creators, inventors, and risk takers. Our economy was structured to be driven by entrepreneurs, and in fact, most net job growth has been from smaller firms. The views and estimates recommend that the SBA continue to implement the recommendations of the Government Accountability Office, GAO's January 2016 report on SBA management. GAO recommended that the SBA increase training, procedural guidance, strategic and workforce planning, and oversight information technology investments. In her brief time at the helm, Administrator McMahon, her priorities to revitalize the SBA, deliver SBA services efficiently and effectively, and ensure the SBA is offering services that small businesses need, have made the SBA more user-friendly and efficient. She's traveled across the country to meet with SBA employees and small businesses. She came to my district, and she really did a great job there. And we're pleased that her team is making good progress. The end result will be a better SBA, one that delivers results for America's small businesses and for the taxpayers. And finally, I would like to thank the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, and her staff for the helpful improvements that she has made to this year's views and estimates document. I appreciate her willingness to work collegially to meet our responsibilities to small businesses. We do appreciate that very much. And I would now yield to her for the, actually we have one more thing to do before we do. Well, that was the, okay. And I'll yield to the ranking member for her comments that she has on the views and estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, we are marking up a broad document in which the majority focuses on improving program functions and oversight at the Small Business Administration. This is consistent with the committee's previous work and the bipartisan manner in which we have conducted past oversight, something that is lacking here in Washington. So I am very proud of the bipartisan working relationship in which we conduct businesses here on behalf of the American people. I commend the chairman for continuing to operate in this inclusive bipartisan fashion. In that vein, we agree with much of the majority's views. For example, recommending SBA to take steps to better manage its capital access, procurement, and entrepreneurial development programs is prudent governance. Doing so advances SBA's mission to assist small businesses and better protect taxpayers. Likewise, we share concerns that the SBA has repeatedly failed to properly evaluate its pilot programs, and the absence of performance benchmarks makes it nearly impossible to understand what these initiatives are accomplishing. By creating new initiatives, the SBA is straining its limited resources. Instead, it should be relying on time-tested programs for a fraction of the costs. Similarly, SBA should strengthen oversight of its lending programs and monitor its loan volume for purposes of managing its 7A lending cap. When it comes to the lending cap, it is critical the agency be afforded flexibility to address unanticipated demand for loans. The chairman and I have authored legislation to achieve this goal, and I look forward to working together to move it toward enactment. Let me also emphasize that in addition to avoiding interruptions in the SBA's lending activity, 7A and other program loans should be targeted to businesses who need them the most. To this point, we must ensure that SBA improves outreach to borrowers and lenders in underserved markets. Some of the SBA most important programs kicks in following disaster. SBA's disaster loans remain the primary form of federal assistance for both homeowners and small businesses, and is rightly stated by the majority that continued monitoring of disaster funding is required. Despite much agreement when it comes to the Regulatory Flexibility Act, our views do diverge from the majority's. Certainly, the Act is an important tool for small firms in reducing regulatory burdens. What we disagreed with is the blanket rejection of regulations that safeguard health, safety, and the environment. Democrats stress that we must proceed with thoughtful deliberation to tailor regulation for small businesses. That said, I look forward to finding common ground with the chairman in the area of regulatory policy, as we have done with so many other policy issues. Disagreement on agency priorities is not unusual, and that is why committee Democrats will be submitting additional views and estimates to the Budget Committee. Still, I would like to emphasize this year there is common ground on most areas of oversight and agency operation. SBA remains the government's best resource for small business, be it capital access, training, or contracting opportunities. The success of the economy depends on small business leading the way, and the SBA is central to this. I thank the chairman again for holding this markup, and I look forward to continuing to work in a bipartisan way to foster entrepreneurship in our country. I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. Are there any other members who wish to be recognized for a statement on the views and estimates on the priorities of the committee for fiscal year 2019? Seeing none, the committee now moves to consideration of the views and estimates. The clerk will read the title of the document.
Views and estimates of the
I
Committee
ask
of...
unanimous consent that the views and estimates be considered as read and open for amendment in its entirety. Does any member seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Seeing no amendments, the question is on adopting the views and estimates on the priorities of the committee for fiscal year 2019. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the views and estimates are agreed to. I now recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to give notice pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2L, that the committee's Democrats will be filing additional views with the Committee on the Budget regarding SBA's FY 2019 budget.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
And the committee is authorized to make technical and grammatical corrections to the views and estimates. And I would like to thank everyone for participating today. And this meeting of the Committee on Small Business is adjourned. Members, please stay seated because we're going to begin the next meeting as soon as I can switch the books here. Okay. And if the witnesses would like to come up that we have for the following hearing. The witnesses here. Where are the witnesses, did you say?
They're right outside.
Oh,
Should be
okay.
on the inside anyway.
Okay. Well, I understand they're out in the hallway, so I assume they're bringing them in. All righty, here we go. Okay, the committee will come back to order. We'll now shift to hearing on the role of small businesses in the American economy. And we want to thank our witnesses for being here today, and we'll get to you very shortly. The American economy, I believe, is poised for great things. Significant growth is occurring across the nation, and Americans, and particularly entrepreneurs, are finally, once again, optimistic about the future of business. In fact, the National Federation of Independent Optimism Index of their members recently reached one of the strongest readings in the 45-year history of the survey. And it's just getting started. Congress and the President have worked together to end the oppressive regulatory burden of the past several years, and the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. Multinational corporations like Apple and Chrysler and IBM are again investing heavily in American manufacturing and American jobs, giving the burgeoning economy an enormous boost. All that good news comes even before we consider the effect of the significant pro-growth policies of the tax cuts we passed at the end of last year. Again, American companies are stepping up and investing in their infrastructure and their workforce. Because of the tax overhaul, over $3 billion in bonuses have been given to employees at the largest companies like AT&T, American Airlines, Fifth Third Bank, and on and on. But it's working for small firms, too, like the $1,000 bonuses given to Sheffer Corporation's 126 employees in Blue Ash, Ohio, next door to my district. But as always, we can do more, much more. Our small businesses, the true engines of our economy, unfortunately continue to experience a rigid lending environment. While large companies can turn to debt and equity markets to raise capital, small businesses all over the country regularly turn to conventional bank lending to finance their projects. And at times, small firms are unable to access conventional lending, so they have nowhere to turn for the capital to grow their businesses and create jobs. Making access to capital easier for small firms has been a priority of this committee since day one. Recent research conducted by Goldman Sachs has shown that while some areas of the country have experienced a thawing of sorts in credit markets, the same cannot be said for largely urban and predominantly rural areas of our country. For a rising tide to truly raise all boats, we must continue to find ways to help small businesses in those areas. We have an excellent panel of policy experts and small business owners to explain this new research and offer suggestions as to what the federal government can do better. That includes mimicking some of the successes found in Goldman Sachs' 10,000 Small Businesses initiative that has helped over 7,000 small firms in all 50 states get started or expand. I'm looking forward, as I know we all are, to this discussion this morning, and I would now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this timely hearing. Today, we will touch on one of the central issues for small business formation and growth, namely capital access. In recent years, we have seen a decline in entrepreneurship, with the low point arriving in 2014 when just 450,000 businesses started. This reduction in business formation can be attributed to a number of factors, but the availability of affordable credit has certainly been one of the reasons. Lack of capital remains an ongoing problem for many businesses, regardless of their size or location. However, this issue is particularly pronounced for women and minorities, even though they are the fastest growing groups of entrepreneurs. We are potentially losing out on millions of jobs that could be created by these firms, and if lending shrinks due to recent market volatility, it will be much worse. That is why today's hearing is so timely, so we can learn about private sector initiatives that could complement our government efforts to grow our nation's entrepreneurial sector. Entrepreneurial development initiatives prove to be critical by providing counseling and training resources to help small businesses start, grow, and compete in the marketplace. While the Small Business Administration and other federal agencies provide support in these crucial areas, private sector alternatives often have the capacity for filling in gaps. One such initiative is the 10,000 Small Businesses Program, a public-private partnership designed to promote growth and job creation potential of small business owners. Efforts like this one are critical in helping small business owners who strive to grow and create meaningful impact in their communities. By leveraging the ability of community development financial institutions, this program has reached businesses in every state, as well as Puerto Rico and D.C. CDFIs and the Treasury CDFI Fund help small businesses access credit opportunities when traditional financial institutions fail to lend. With accessible rates and transparent terms, they help increase the likelihood of a small firm's success. In FY 2016 alone, CDFIs made over 39,000 loans or investments, totaling over $3.6 billion, and financed more than 11,000 small businesses. This hearing gives us the opportunity to hear from business founders regarding their experiences in starting and running a business, and research showing the challenges they overcame to become successful. Hearing your experiences and stories helps the committee to make better decisions as we work to foster an environment conducive to small business growth. With that, I want to thank all the witnesses for their participation and insights. Welcome. And I really appreciate that you are here this morning. I thank the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady yields back. And if committee members have opening statements prepared, I would ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'll take just a moment to explain our timing lights. And the rules are very simple. You get 5 minutes, and the lights assist you in that. The green light will be on for 4 minutes, and then the yellow light will come on to let you know you got a minute to wrap up. Then the red light will come on, and you're supposed to wrap up then. And we ask you to kind of stay within that. If you go a little long, we'll go it, but we'll allow you to have a little extra time, but try to stay within it if at all possible. And I'd now like to introduce our very distinguished panel here this morning. Our first witness is Stephen Strongen, Head of Global Investment Research at Goldman Sachs. He's also a member of their Management Committee, Firm-Wide Client and Business Standards Committee, and Firm-Wide Reputational Risk Committee. Prior to joining the firm, he spent 12 years at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, most recently as the Director of Monetary Policy Research. He earned his undergraduate and graduate degrees in economics from the University of Chicago and a graduate degree from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. And we thank you for being here this morning, Mr. Strongen. Our second witness is J.R. Foster, President and CEO of the Robert Lewis Group, or RLG, in America's greatest city, Cincinnati, Ohio. I happen to represent Cincinnati. RLG is a full-service commercial real estate brokerage and facilities management firm focused on representing the real estate and facility needs of companies, governmental agencies, nonprofits, and investors. RLG's integrated services allow them to achieve optimum results across their clients' entire real estate portfolio. While headquartered in Cincinnati, they have additional offices in several lesser cities like Chicago and Columbus, Ohio. Just kidding. And we thank you for your time here this morning. They're all great cities. Not as good as Cincinnati, but they're great cities. And I would now yield to the ranking member for introduction of the next witness, and she comes from a pretty special city, too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Jessica Johnson Cope, President and Principal of Johnson Security, based in the Bronx, New York. Johnson Security is a third-generation family-owned firm which has been recognized as one of the 5,000 fastest-growing private companies in America for 3 years and the 2013 Black Enterprise Family Business of the Year. Ms. Johnson Cope earned a Bachelor's of Science in Industrial Engineering from Northwestern University and a master's degree in Market Research from the University of Georgia. She's also a graduate of the inaugural class of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Initiative. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Strong, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chabot and Ranking Member Velasquez. It's a pleasure to be here and I get a chance to talk about small businesses. You very aptly summarized what I think is the core economic issue we face in small businesses, which has been slow growth and access to credit. When you look at the data, it is stark. Given the most recent data we have, for the first time in modern times, in fact, for we have data, small businesses today are actually in smaller numbers than they were at the beginning of the recession. So we've actually not had a net increase in small businesses over this time period. This coincides with the 10,000 Small Business Summit, and we use that as an opportunity to talk to the small businesses, to better understand what the challenges were, and to try to construct what would be a practical way of addressing those issues. In the process of doing that, I think there are two broad issues which I think this committee is in a position to think about addressing. The first is the sheer volume of rules and regulations faced by small businesses. When you're a large business, you have large groups of people who figure out what the rules are, who track them down and help you comply with them. When you are a small business, that falls to the CEO. That's an enormous challenge that in many cases has changed growth plans, has changed the ability to expand into new regions, has changed the actual business models of these firms. When you talk to small businesses, and we did at length and surveyed them, the number one request you hear from them is essentially a central registry of what all the rules and regulations are that they need to deal with, whether it be state or local. I think it would also probably end up being the greatest database of red tape in the history of mankind. But I think it would actually help people run their businesses in a much more coherent way. The second thing that comes out of that, and I'll come a little bit quickly to the causes of this, is a more centralized way of meeting certification standards and examinations. One of the things I think that Congress has done well over the last 20 or 30 years as the regulatory burdens have increased is they have sought to exempt small businesses. But one of the problems is when you actually talk to small business is those exemptions have not worked and in some cases have actually added to the burdens. And the reason for that comes in two flavors. The first is what I would call indirect regulation. If you want to deal with a large corporation, they become responsible for making sure that their contractors meet all the rules. So instead of a small business having to get certified once for money laundering, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, discrimination, small business statutes, they end up having to certify with every single one of their customers that they meet the standards necessary for that customer, which turn out to be the same for everyone because it's the same federal rules that are being required to be met. So the exemption turns what would have been one form into 50 or 100 forms that are essentially identical and all need to be processed. Right? And so what that requires essentially is a more central repository of meeting those requirements, and that serving as the exemption or safe harbors for their customers for when they hire them, that they don't become responsible for every bit of their behavior. That indirect regulation has ended up being a major issue for these firms, sometimes in ways that are almost impossible to overcome. The other broad category is what I would call accidental regulation. Both the ranking member and the chairman brought up quite correctly that access to capital is a key issue. Our survey, for example, indicated that for the 10,000 small businesses, if you could double the amount of financing they had, they would increase employment by 30%. The economic consequence of that is incredible, particularly when you think about the fact that half of employment in the United States is in small businesses. Why don't they have that access to capital? What are the issues in access to capital? And I think this is where the conversation often becomes confused. The reality of small businesses is that most of the lending, 70% in the case of 10,000 small businesses, is based on FICO scores, which essentially means it is consumer credit, not business credit. And so that as we think about new business credit programs, we miss 70% of the issue. Particularly when you're thinking about startups, which both the chairman and ranking member brought up, that almost inevitably has to do with mortgages, second mortgages, credit cards, personal lending, not with special lending programs. And so that as we think about the regulatory burdens, right, a lot of them come out of the consumer programs and not out of the business programs. And so it takes a much broader look at the issues to understand what the real hurdles are to running a small business, founding a small business, and growing a small business today. You know, as you will hear from the business owners themselves, the amount of creativity needed to find financing means they are looking at every possible channel. And when you look at actual credit channels, what that means in essence is that the consumer channels and the small business channels and small lending channels pick up the dominant amount of that financing because they're the big sources of funds. And so as we think about really addressing the issues, it is centralizing and simplifying the processes, and it is actually understanding which credit channels they use and addressing those that I think would provide the most impact and provide the most relief and the greatest growth in small business. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Foster, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. This is a big moment for my family and myself. My parents have been married 56 years and counting. They never graduated past the 10th grade in high school. My father spent 46 years working in a transmission plant in Cincinnati, Ohio for General Motors in a small town called Norwood. From his backbreaking work that he was able to put forth at General Motors, he sent me to Cincinnati Country Day High School, a college prep high school, as well as DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. As a first-generation college graduate and growing up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Cincinnati, on the west side of Cincinnati, I know a little bit about hard work and overcoming the odds. They say that whom much is given, much is required, and I'm honored to be here. My name is J.R. Foster. I am the CEO and founding member of Robert Lewis Capital and Robert Lewis Group, based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Of the thousands of commercial real estate brokerage and investment banking firms in the country, I'm a rarity among the bunch. My company is one of the only minority-owned and minority-certified commercial real estate brokerage, facility management, and access to capital firms in the country. Our approach is twofold. We help corporations, government agencies, and nonprofits with their real estate brokerage and facility management needs. And we do so in a way that also can help them secure minority spend goals. Secondly, we are leading the charge in helping small business owners gain access to capital. Last year alone, we helped over 300 businesses secure $345 million in capital ranging from SBA loans to conventional and alternative debt. I'm here today because I'm one of the recent graduates of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program, and I'm proud to represent my fellow alumni, the program, and the small business owners who share my same story. I personally knew I had the drive and the determination to start my own company, so I did so. When I was 31 years old, my best friend, now business partner, and I left 2 well-paying jobs on Wall Street to start our own company. What I did not realize is all the hurdles that come with being a small business owner and a minority business owner at that. You take a leap of faith without knowing the underlying pitfalls that derail, frustrate, and leave some of the best minds in America for broke. By our second year in business, I found myself lost in the sea of managing employees, customers, contractors, payroll, marketing, which I know nothing about, and the like. I needed something more than my corporate career had taught me. By chance, I was introduced to the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program, which we affectionately call 10KSB. After a year of great coursework, excellent classroom engagement, and a dialogue with over 100+ small business owners in my cohort, I was able to start excelling at areas where I fell short. I also discovered that our local Chamber of Commerce in Cincinnati and other minority organizations like the Urban League and African American Chamber were also great in helping build capacity of small business owners. After graduating the program, over the past 3 years, we have increased our employee count. We were able to secure additional financing for growth, and our revenue has gone from $250,000 in 2014 to well over $2 million at the end of 2017, basically doubling year after year. What I ask of the chairman and the committee is to help level the playing field for small business owners and minority business owners at that. Having spent the last 2 days at the 10KSB Summit here in DC, I've continued to hear access to capital on the minds of my fellow alumni. Far too often, business owners are scraping together funds, using high-interest credit cards, and also taking on private capital partners that ultimately put them in the golden handcuffs. Even with SBA lending, having already tarnished their credit, over-leveraged themselves with debt, they quickly become unable to qualify for government-backed loans. And I see this every day because we are on the front lines of helping clients secure capital. So I ask that you consider helping a business like mine create a credit-friendly national lending platform and ecosystem that business owners can have a centralized place to secure capital and where banks compete for their business. Thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Ms. Johnson-Cope, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for your time today. I'm reminded of the days when I walked the halls of this building as a congressional page. I am Jessica Johnson-Cope, President and CEO of Johnson Security Bureau, based in the Bronx, New York. I am also the Vice President of the Soapbox, located in Brooklyn, New York. Johnson Security provides professional security guard and armored car services. Since 1962, 3 generations of my family have helped to protect the people, places, and valuable property around New York City. My grandparents left their home in the segregated South in search of opportunity. To them and many others, small business ownership represented those opportunities, the chance to live the American dream and to provide for their family. I am the beneficiary of their vision and their hard work. For the past 10 years, I have led Johnson Security. Shortly after I took over the business, due to the untimely passing of my father, I applied to the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program with hopes of keeping our doors open long enough to celebrate our 50th anniversary. Even though I had watched my father and grandmother make significant business milestones, I didn't feel like I was officially equipped to help Johnson Security reach its full potential. 10,000 small businesses provided me with the tools I needed: executive business education, networking and peer learning opportunities with my peers in the program, business advisory services, and preparation to obtain financing. Since completing the program, Johnson Security has created over 150 jobs. We have had access to capital. We've done business with at least 7 other program alumni. Additionally, we are preparing for the next phase of innovation and job creation. Based on the success of Johnson Security and using lessons from 10,000 small businesses, my husband and I started a second business, the Soapbox, where we're able to live out his family's entrepreneurial vision. The Soapbox provides premium laundry services in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood where we live. The Soapbox not only allows us to save our clients time, it allows us to employ 7 people and to transform our community while collaborating with other small businesses. Our work comes with its challenges, though, as we try to navigate burdensome regulations. Nonetheless, we are determined to continue to grow. The impact of the 10,000 Small Businesses program is evidenced not just in the impact that I've shared with you, but also in the outcome that the 2,200 plus program alumni who have gathered here in DC have witnessed, in addition to the research that Steve just presented. My peers and I face many challenges as we grow our business. The current business environment makes it increasingly difficult for businesses like ours to survive, let alone to grow. One challenge is finding capable talent. In addition to leading my family business, I serve on a New York State Workforce Investment Board. In this capacity, I hear about candidates who lack the technical skills that we need as our industries advance. Additionally, I hear of the number of people coming into the workforce without key skills that include communication and critical thinking skills, basic soft skills. I know of countless small business owners who would welcome workforce development investment from the government. By providing small businesses with better information on and access to WIOA initiatives, you can better make a significant difference in addressing some of the workforce disadvantages small businesses like ours face. Another challenge is in obtaining capital, as you've heard. It can be even more difficult for minorities and women-owned business. Johnson Security received financing, and we've been able to use that money to grow. You can ensure that the nation's businesses can effectively utilize the SBA programs that are intended to help businesses like ours. Federal contracting is yet one additional area where you can remove some of the barriers to small business success. Johnson Security has leveraged many of the small business federal business programs to become a contractor. However, we know of many agencies that are falling short of their subcontracting goals. You can put stronger accountability measures in place to ensure that more contracts are awarded to our nation's qualified small businesses. In closing, the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program has been instrumental in the growth not only of Johnson Security Bureau, but the Soapbox and over 7,600 companies across this nation. I encourage you to promote the program in viable firms in your districts and to watch and see the impact that will have on our economy. I also implore you to consider making changes to some of the regulations that are hindering small business growth. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your time and attention this morning. I look forward to the work this committee will do to continue to help make our nation's small businesses big.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the questioning, and I'll begin with you, Mr. Strong. And on a macroeconomic level, have we been doing the right things over the past year with eliminating some of the regulatory burdens and lowering taxes, as was done recently in the tax bill? Would you expect to see positive trends in small business formation in the near future? And how long does it take to have those incentives reach the person wanting to start a business?
Well, I think there's 2 aspects to that. It's certainly the right direction. I think when you look at the sheer volume of rules, one of the small business owners used the phrase, the death of 1,000 cuts.
Mm-hmm. Would you mind pulling the mic a little closer? Sure. We got some competition.
No problem. One of the small business owners used the phrase, death of 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid, when you cut that by 10%, it's still not that pleasant. And so I think as you think about really changing the burden, you actually have to think about things like safe harbors, and common certifications that will cut through hundreds, if not thousands, of rules in one step, rather than, surgically removing bits and pieces. And so I think that broadly it will help. I also think that when you look at the consumer and financing side, that the changes there have actually so far been quite modest. There is certainly intent, whether it be with the Fed or the CFPB, to change the rules. But when you look at the academic work, it's been very clear that small business lending and consumer lending, and particularly startup financing, has been one of the areas in which the regulators have put the greatest burden and capital standards. And particularly, and I think this is something that gets missed, when you look at business formation in low income and rural areas where FICO scores tend to be low, those burdens are extraordinarily high. And so I really do think it will be important to look very carefully at the lending standards that were developed post-financial crisis to give them a greater friendliness to lending for the purposes of small business startups and small business operations.
Okay, thank you very much. And could you, I'll just follow up with a question. Do you have an opinion relative to, say, Dodd-Frank, what effect that's had on access to capital with small businesses across the country?
I mean, one of the difficulties in analyzing Dodd-Frank is that when it generates, I think the current count is 23,000 pages at the Federal Register, that it becomes a little difficult to separate out one item from the next.
Yeah.
The way we have approached this question is looking at the cumulative impact. And when you look at the cumulative impact, we're roughly 700,000 small businesses short of where you would have been under pre-financial crisis rules. That is a great number of small businesses.
Yeah.
Right, so that financial burden looks quite high. When you look also, what I would call it the leap phase of small businesses, when they go from small to not small, that has equally been hit in the numbers, and the number of public companies has been falling, because those are the two places where it's the greatest leap of faith in the process. And when you create a system that's anti-risk, it is the moments of that leap of faith that are, of course, going to be hit the worst.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Foster and Ms. Johnson-Cope, I'll ask you both if you could. Could you tell us how the 10,000 small businesses program has directly impacted you all, and do you think this is something that could be replicated in other parts of the country?
Yeah, I'll take that for a starter. For myself and for our firm, it's helped tremendously. I mean, the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program has allowed us to leverage my alumni that are in the room, right? As a small business, you don't really have the opportunity to go out and start a board of directors. And so being able to leverage the folks that are in my cohort who have like-minded experiences that I have gone through, it's more of a sounding board of folks that have reached those same kind of hurdles and trying to get over those hurdles. So for us, we've been able to leverage that community that Goldman Sachs provides, as well as I think the program should be replicated and produced across the country.
Thank you very much. Ms. Copeland, or Johnson-Cope.
As a graduate of the inaugural class in New York City, we had the opportunity not just to build relationships with the community college partner, LaGuardia Community College, with the other program participants, but also with members of the administration at Goldman Sachs and members of the city administration in New York City. So the program represented the best of public-private partnership, and instead of giving us a golden ticket, it gave us the opportunity to learn how to navigate corporate, private sector business opportunities for us to grow, as well as how to take advantage of some of the publicly available resources. So just bringing better attention and access to what resources were available to us, that has helped tremendously, and then the relationships have really put us over the top.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strongin, in your written testimony, you touch on the geographic concentration of capital. Besides location preferences, there is a tendency for banks and venture capitalists to invest more in male-owned than female-owned businesses. Minority-owned firms fare just as poorly. In your experience, what impediments are there for minorities and women to gain access to capital?
This goes back to what I was talking about. I was talking with the chairman about anti-risk. It is not that women or poor communities are sort of worse risk inherently, but they typically have less equity in their homes, and they typically have,
If you don't mind, but I'm not referring to poor communities. I'm referring to minority business owners who might be doing quite well, even medium size, and the data showed that access to capital is more difficult to come by than white male
no,
owners.
I did understand the question. One of the issues you run, and this is equally true of rural lending, is that when you look at the way the risk calculations are done, you take account of both where you do business, how you do business, and the assets held by the business. And so what you get is a reflection of the asset concentration that mirrors the business problem you just raised. Is that the groups who have the greatest asset calculations because of their personal assets typically have an easier time getting funding. You also have an issue that those people who are doing business in well-diversified, richer communities have an easier time getting credit because they are less risky, right? And so one of the things, and this goes to the heart of whenever you talk about entrepreneurship, if you don't embrace risk, you end up disenfranchising large groups of people who want to make that leap.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Foster, I would like to hear your take on that question.
We represent or have 170 banks that we work with across the country, and it's interesting to see the type of companies that come to our table looking for access to capital, and those that come to us that are minority, women-owned, LGBT, veteran-owned businesses, and mostly the minority and women-owned set, find challenge, the greatest challenge, because I think banks provide a higher scrutiny on them than their majority counterparts. And we see it across the board, whether it's credit score, FICO, whether it's P&L and balance sheets. I think they have less access to some of the best minds, CPA firms, legal counsel, which hinders them when they actually are putting their package together for lending. And so what we've tried to do is create a level playing field so that we provide that expertise when they can't afford to.
Thank you. So, U.S. inflation grew over 2% in January, making it more likely that the Federal Reserve, will raise interest rates quickly this year. This, in turn, will make the cost of capital more expensive for small businesses. What impact will this have on women and minority borrowers who continue to struggle getting loans? I'm sorry, but
No, it's quite all right.
it might be coming, right?
No, I mean, this goes to how you think about growth in the deepest level. Whenever you talk about any issue related to social mobility, the faster the economy grows, the more impact you will have on disadvantaged communities.
Okay.
And so the strength of the recovery will be very important for the positive. Equally, and this I think was the point, the increase in interest rates acts as a counterbalance there because it makes it harder for those who don't already have that capital to get it, right? And so it's going to work both ways. The business opportunity is going to rise. The ability to exploit it is going to go down.
Ms. Johnson, please. Can you talk to us about the workforce disadvantages that small businesses like yours face compared to larger counterparts?
So I mentioned potentially greater access to and information on the WIOA initiatives. What I've seen as I'm serving on the New York State Workforce Investment Board is that typically the WIOA programs are focused towards the large corporations, and small businesses don't even know they exist. And when the grant and funding opportunities are presented, you have to have a massive program and someone who specializes in writing grants and writing proposals. And as a small business owner, typically we don't have that personnel. We don't have the resources to go after those opportunities. And the large corporations don't welcome us to be a part of their proposals to take advantage of those initiatives. And so if we can't even get people who can provide good customer service skills, we can't look at people who can provide good who have good computer skills or additional skills that are needed as we try to compete, not only as small businesses, but as we compete as a nation.
The ranking member's time has
Thank you.
expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentlelady from American Samoa, Ms. Radowagan, who's the chairman of Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Talofa, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member, for holding this hearing today, and thank all of you for testifying today. I represent the territory of American Samoa, a little jewel of the Pacific. Small businesses are a little different at home. Almost every family has one. In fact, 99% of our businesses in American Samoa are small businesses. So there's growing produce or livestock that they sell at the market. These small businesses are our community, our family. This leads me to my first question, both Ms. Johnson-Cope and Mr. Foster. Can you talk a little bit about how your companies are helping to invigorate your communities and how successful small firms can have a ripple effect on the surrounding areas in a symbiotic relationship? American Samoa, our only source of higher education is our local community college. And Ms. Johnson-Cope, I see as part of your experience with the 10,000 Small Businesses program, you mentioned a community college partner, LaGuardia Community College. Would you say that the college was offering courses to their students that would make it easier for you to make that student your next employee? Is the curriculum beneficial for employers? Are they producing graduates with enough skills, or are you finding that you still have to invest resources into training? I'm interested in seeing what I can bring back to my own community college to help develop small businesses in American Samoa.
So through the relationship with the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, I've had the opportunity to work with Dr. Gail Mello, the president at LaGuardia Community College. And we've had very extensive discussions on how their curricula can better demonstrate what employers like Johnson Security need in terms of workforce development, in terms of skills and talents. And so to that end, we're looking at creating a special security initiative to help better prepare some of my employees as well as other students that come through the college. The challenge is for the community college environment, there's so many other issues at hand. Everyone is expected to go to college. There's a negative perception for people who go through community colleges. In many community colleges, there may not be as strong a link to the corporate world, the small business world, and so the relationships and the curriculum don't match up on a one-to-one basis. But through 10,000 Small Businesses, we're having the opportunity to have those discussions and shape the curriculum that will make a difference. And we do see a ripple effect in our community. So as an example, my business is located in the same neighborhood where I grew up. So I have to be accountable to my neighbors and the people that remember me as a child. And I can see the difference that we make in that we're putting people to work. We're taking them out of the homeless shelters. We're taking them off of the public funding rosters, and it's making a difference. We can't do it for everyone, and we can't do it without the help of leaders like yourself.
Mr. Foster.
So our experience is twofold. We have the fortunate nature of being on the Access to Capital side, so we are very much engaged with local community organizations that are helping put folks back to work. So one of the organizations that we work closely with is the Joseph House in Cincinnati, which is an institution that helps veterans that are coming back into the workforce either find employment and or start their own company. And so on the side of starting their own company, we're helping them put forth access to capital. We're at least helping them with programs to get access to capital ready. On the flip side, the other side of the coin, we have one of the largest minority-owned facility management companies in Cincinnati. And of the 120 contract workers that we have, more than half of our folks are from the workforce development startup communities, right? So you have those that we're putting back to work, whether they're out of the prison system or out of a veteran situation. So it gives us the ability to kind of give back to the community in that way through workforce development.
Thank you. Mr. Strongen, I just wanted to mention that with regard to at least microfinance business loans out in our neck of the woods, they tend to favor women because they find that the women are the ones who pay their debts, and the men tend to allow their loans to go into arrears. I just thought I'd throw that in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We
I
have
yield
another
back.
program called 10,000 Women that has used that globally quite well.
Cool. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I
Thank-
yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Strong, I want to have you respond to something Mr. Foster said. And the phrase he used is credit-friendly lending ecosystem. So in your mind, I'm interested in you telling me, what do you think is a credit-friendly lending ecosystem? What do you think that is from your perspective? Because on your page 17, y'all have putting the cost of new bank regulations in economic context, as well as I heard the chairman ask the question about Dodd-Frank. So I'm trying to understand, in your mind, what do you think that means?
It's actually a great phrase because I think one of the real problems in the way the financial system has evolved is it's friendlier to some activities than others.
Right.
Right? And so in the case of small businesses, inventory financing is okay. Asset purchases is tough but doable. But true growth funding is virtually impossible.
Okay. And I heard you yesterday say at this round table, you raised a question around the tax policy. Yesterday, you recall when you raised a question around when we make decisions about tax policies, we just passed a tax bill. And the impression I got from you yesterday was you raised some questions about what we did with that tax bill and decisions we made. Do you recall that conversation yesterday?
I do.
Okay, so can you speak to a tax bill that was pushed through this process? How exactly does that, in a specific way, help in terms of small businesses?
I want to start with a bit of information that Jessica normally actually provides about the way they have community impact. When you talk to the small businesses, one of the things you hear over and over again is the incredible work they do in taking people who are otherwise not ready for the workforce, investing time and effort into those people, and creating people who are truly productive members of our society and have much better lives.
Right.
The tax code as it's currently structured provides no tax benefits for that investment at all. It doesn't recognize it because it's not a structured investment in the way that a bank thinks of an investment. It's the sweat and time of the business owner themselves, and that's not recognized as investment. On the other hand, if you buy a machine to replace that person, that is recognized by the tax code as investment. That's not a particular attack on the last tax bill. That's an attack on the last 40 tax bills. That we don't recognize the fact that the time and effort and sweat of these business leaders to create a better workforce and to strengthen our communities isn't recognized as the investment it really is.
Okay, I understand that, and I understand I've only been here for 13 months, so that's the only bill that I dealt with. So you talk about the 40 tax bills. The only thing I'm trying to do is figure out a way at that nexus, how do we, in a very specific way, move the needle when you talked about the disconnect on economic growth in small businesses and large businesses. So I'm trying to understand something. And second, let me piggyback real quick. CDFIs, I think the conversation came up about CDFIs. Goldman Sachs put up like 250 million or something to CDFIs. You chose to use that mechanism versus the financial aspect of going to banks. Talk a little bit about that.
This goes to the ecosystem question that you raised, is that you need different types of financing at different moments in a firm's lifetime.
Right.
The startup tends to be very mortgage, credit card, personal asset intensive. When they're healthier and larger, it tends to be more the sort of standard bank lending to small businesses. When you need to make that leap to an investment, right, when you're going to grow a business from 30 employees to 200 employees, that's when these special lending programs become very important, like the CDFIs. They have been in special cases, very successful, but broadly, they've never been large enough to make a broad-scale macroeconomic difference. To certain businesses, they've been very, very important and very helpful. And you know, from standpoint of our own experience with it, we've had people who've been helped. Interesting enough, they weren't the people we set out to help. The actual people in the 10,000 Small Business Program actually have not used our CDFI to any great extent. Some have, but it turned out that a different group of small business owners came in and used it. And that goes to your ecosystem. You really need healthy lending and access to capital along the entire lifespan of these firms, and that tends to be different answers at different points in their lifespan.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who's the chairman of Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat. Thank you to our panelists for being here today. I'm a small business owner myself, and I represent northeastern Iowa. And as I tour my district of 20 counties, the biggest issue the small businesses have in my district is finding employees. And I've talked to Secretary Mnuchin about this. I've talked to Speaker Ryan about this. I believe the tax reform we just passed could lead to 4% economic growth sustained over the next 10 years, certainly 3.5%. But I think a couple things could hold us back, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on these. And the biggest thing is finding employees. And immediately what comes to my mind is some sane immigration policy, and also a sane welfare reform policy. So I would love to hear your thoughts. I don't want this to get political, but finding employees is a challenge.
So
and just to hear your thoughts on where do we look for employees? Is the government helping or hurting in that aspect of it?
So the representative would like me to talk about immigration and welfare without being political.
That's a challenge.
That will
isn't
be an
it?
interesting challenge.
Point well taken.
But you are quite right. Immigration, and if you talk to business leaders broadly, particularly corporate CEOs, they will talk about immigration and flexible immigration and skill-based immigration as one of their top priorities. Because when you're trying to grow a firm, very typically there will be specific skill sets you are missing, and the ability to get the best people for those specific skills is very important. When you go to less skilled labor, immigration also plays a role, okay? So does the educational system. So do the incentives to work. One of the things that I think is very important, and the small business, my panelists can talk to this better, is the fact that we don't recognize how small businesses actually create workers and train workers. And the way that interacts with the minimum wage, among other rules, is an issue. Small businesses get no training credits. They receive no training credits from when they take someone who has not graduated high school, who potentially has been incarcerated, who has potentially been unemployed because of structural dislocations from a factory in a rural town. And they train that person, they give them new skills, and they employ them. That process is completely unrecognized by the system today, right? And the notion that we would then, potentially create some significant grant forms so they could qualify goes right back into the red tape issue. And so I think a true appreciation of the role these businesses play will in some part help you with that workforce problem, because that's how you create it.
That's a good point. I'd like to hear from the other panelists as well.
Our biggest challenge on the facility management side is workforce, because of the folks that we employ, the folks that are pushing brooms and turning wrenches, often don't come from the background of college graduates and whatnot. And so, as he mentioned, our biggest challenge is we're pulling direct capital from our company to train those folks, right, and not getting a strong return as it relates to the contract with our client. So what we're having to do is really do grassroots training, create facilities and create training. And what we've done in Cincinnati is we've partnered with other like-minded business owners who are also are going through the same thing that we're going through. We partnered with a general contracting company in Cincinnati, and we are putting their folks and our folks through the same rigorous training, but also pulling from the same candidate, so we can also flex workers from their contracts to our contracts to make sure that we are providing the right sort of customer and client-first attention to the contract.
What I've noticed is that there are people who are sitting on the sidelines who are not in the job market, even though the statistics show that employment levels are improving. And I guess that's a good place to have a conversation with small business owners, with the people who are sitting on the fringe and not working, and understand where's the disconnect that makes them not want to work. I've seen young people who've turned down job opportunities because they're waiting for that $15 an hour job because of the promise of a higher minimum wage. At the same time, they're currently not working. They don't have a good set of skills and not willing to get those skills, but they have the promise of a higher minimum wage. And so it's important to have the discussion not only with the business owners, but with the elected officials, but those people that are sitting on the fringe. And then also understanding where are we going as a nation in terms of our jobs, so that we can make sure that we can invest in the skills that people need. Because if you had thought back 10, 20 years ago, we weren't thinking that people would be largely using the internet and that robots would be replacing people. So we need to be thinking forward about what jobs are going to come and then engage the people who aren't working to figure out how to put them to work.
Thank you very much. I yield back the time I do not have.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is ranked member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. And I was just sitting here listening to a great deal of what you all were stating. And, you know, I've been in business for the past 36 years. And when I first went in, I was in the insurance business. And over the years, in dealing with attorneys, doctor's office, and everybody else, when you in interviews and stuff like that, it was always about access to capital. You know, so some 40 years later, the same issue is surfacing about access to capital. And since the downturn in the economy and since 2008, the same thing happens now with small businesses. And then you're seeing some increases in small business except for African-American businesses. Can you tell me, because it's been an issue for a long time, what is going to take, in your opinion, to increase the growth with access to capital to African-American businesses so they can hire in some of these disadvantaged communities, what you talked about, Ms. Strong, before, because that's where it needs to increase so you can actually put people to work and at the same time help improve the economy. And the last thing I want all y'all to address, and I always ask this in the committee, what can this committee do to really help small businesses? You know, when you talk about Dodd-Frank, 7,000 pages of information that people have to go through, what can we do? And I'm going to try to cut it short because I'd like to hear from all of y'all about how can we increase it.
When you talk to the small business owners themselves, and they will do this far better than I, starting a small business is an act of faith in yourself and in the economy. And the lending and access to capital around that is inherently going to be a fairly risky process. And if you look at the history of that process, it has always been sort of personal lending, savings, family help. That's not really going to change. Okay, we're not going to create a program where we're going to give everyone one chance at a small business, right? It is about the small business owners' faith in themselves and allowing them to take that chance. What happened post-crisis is we developed a belief that people were no longer capable of making that decision for themselves. We began to leave that decision to the banks, that the banks were supposed to prevent people from taking bad risks. That act of faith is often a bad risk. The statistics on success in starting a small business are frightening. It's all the more credit and more amazing when you see people do it and succeed, or do it a second time or a third time and succeed. And that really does require an attitude toward risk that's just different. And it is something we've done in the past. If you look at the financial crisis in the 1980s, the number one goal of financial policy in the 1980s was to maintain credit to those businesses. And they succeeded, and you had small business growth. That was not without a price, right? The S&L crisis was the bill for that policy, but it maintained a level of entrepreneurship. It created an amazing number of small business jobs, and it allowed that entrepreneurial spirit to go. But it was very much an ideological embracing of risk. This time, we have decided that risk itself is a problem. That's the axis we have to develop these decisions on, and that is the act of faith that drives entrepreneurship and growth, not a program.
Foster.
Yeah, from my standpoint, it starts earlier than that. I think it starts with access to education. I think it starts with access to opportunity. And then you get to access to capital. Because I think in our communities, the Black community, African American communities, and minority communities as a whole, we don't get a lot of opportunity to experience being a business owner or seeing our families, our father, our mother, being a business owner, right? And so first you need to start at the education level, and what does it mean inside of our school systems to run a business? And can we get programs to help youngsters understand what it means to run a business? And then once that, you have the opportunity and the mindset, and then you can start putting in programs like access to capital at an early age. So that's my thought, and then from there, it starts to grow throughout the lineage of minority and African American households.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. And the gentlelady from Puerto Rico, Miss Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, who has unfortunately had to experience when a hurricane comes through and wipes out a great deal of the infrastructure and the challenge that is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership, allowing us and the small business in Puerto Rico to recover with the measures that are so important to do so. So this kind of hearing, it's important to us, and I will first of all say thank you to the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program. We actually got 10 or more people from Puerto Rico as your program. Actually, one of them is here today, Iris Vincent from Primary Corp in Puerto Rico. And we feel very proud about her. She's an entrepreneur, a small businesswoman that has been awarded actually by her leadership on the island and by the Small Business Administration. And actually, that will be my first question. Do you think the territories, and we're not talking just about Puerto Rico, we're talking about U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Guam, Northern Marianas, and even, of course, you don't count Washington, D.C. as a territory, but does the territories have different challenges in terms of accessing those kind of loans and investment to make that first effort to establish a firm?
They do. One of the aspects of the modern set of rules is that almost any area that faces special challenges, right? Whether it be rural farming communities or territories where the risk profile is higher, faces difficulties in getting credit from the centralized banks. The way we now score banks on their lending practices and the way we viewed discrimination means that any area that's higher risk creates legal challenges for the bank if they lend into it. You know, when I was at the Federal Reserve, was the period where we phased in CRA, which had exactly the opposite intent, right? It was about getting credit into those communities. The way we now score banks, we make that provision of credit sort of regulatorily dangerous because bad performance, higher rates to different areas all create potential legal problems.
What this committee can do to help those territories to access that?
So I think that from the standpoint of the way the regulation of banks is set, it really has to be about more the actual risk, allowing the lending to be more about the borrower and less about the borrower group. I don't want to suggest that banks are perfect in any stretch of the imagination when it comes to the way they embrace each and every community. But when you set up the rules to enforce very precise treatment, inevitably those rules will be highly discriminatory against some communities and in favor of others. And the way the current rules are set up, it actually hurts the communities most in need of help. the ones with very specific economic structures, right, where they tend to get bad weather. Farming communities, because of similar weather issues, are very high-risk areas, and so they tend to have the greatest problems getting credit.
Can you and all the witnesses provide a list for the committee of those recommendations that you understand will help us out? And because my time is almost get to expire, and I want to make another question, you can submit that to the chairman. But I'm very impressed about the testimonies regarding Mr. Foster and Ms. Johnson regarding how your businesses grew your revenues, created more jobs, expanded your operation, you access financing. I mean, for me, it's important to know what skills do that program, the 10,000 Goldman Sachs program, actually help it to improve and develop? I mean, what are those skills that are mostly needed that makes the difference between that kind of program and others?
The first skill I would say is confidence, because it's one thing for me to do business with businesses in my community that are small just like I am. To have to make a case to a firm like Goldman Sachs and to large corporations as why they should do business with me, it gave me an air of confidence that prepared me to go into other corporations and to ready my business and ready my team to provide our services on a grander scale, and to show people in our community that we were able to go beyond what we had previously seen as our limits. So confidence is that first skill. Another skill would be just in financial management, to look at dollars and add a zero to the level of and volume of contracts we had previously done. It opened our eyes to bigger opportunities, and so it allowed us to walk into more contracts and to prepare to create those jobs that our community needed. So confidence and financial management.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Velasquez, for hosting today, and to all of the witnesses. Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Strong, and HBCUs are well-suited to foster entrepreneurship and startup business growth due to access to high-caliber human capital, our students and professors, while also providing a support structure to establish new ventures. I was delighted to see that Goldman Sachs is recognizing the untapped potential of HBCU institutions and is partnering with at least one HBCU. Last year, the Goldman Sachs 10,000 partnered with Morgan State. And so I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, if you could expand on the Goldman's partnership with Morgan, what's Morgan's role in the partnership, and do you have future plans to partner with other HBCUs?
The last part of that is easier for me to describe than the first, because the answer to that is yes. We're looking to expand the program broadly. This year, we set up a national cohort that would allow us to bring people from across all 50 states in, even where we didn't have a partner. We continue to search out partners, particularly in areas where the benefit would be greatest, and where we can stretch into the Black community, into the Hispanic community, also, part of the national resource into the rural communities. One of the things the research has shown very strongly is that small businesses are incredibly important for creating resilience in communities and very important for renewal of communities. Much better than a single factory from a large corporation. And so in our own view of creating a healthy economic environment, creating a good ecosystem for small business, we think is the single greatest thing we can do to improve community resilience, particularly in those communities that have been hardest hit. And that can either be a geographic community or an ethnic community or a territory, right? It really has to do with dealing with the major economic forces we face today of technological disruption, globalization, the issues in urban communities, the issues in rural communities we face, that when you're trying to fix those issues, that expanding that reach, particularly across those communities that need that help, this is the best place to do it. And so it's why the program was formed in the first place, and it's why we are attempting to expand it, and it was why we brought everyone together at the summit to communicate that to Congress, right? So they could understand why we think this is part of the answer.
Yeah, well, you're certainly very visible today, and I want to commend you on your program and those nice scarves that the folks are wearing. They're very wonderful, wonderful. I see Joyce Brayboy, and I want to thank you for being here, and all of the folks from Goldman Sachs. I had an opportunity to visit the headquarters up in New York a few months back. Diverse business owners add to the supply chain in valuable ways, and research shows that companies that embrace diversity are more profitable than companies that do not. So does Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program teach businesses how to navigate other companies, supplier diversity programs, and how does this program serve as a feeder into that chain?
It certainly does. I mean, the graduates can speak to that better than I can. I'll note before I pass it to them, because they will do it better than me.
Got 1 minute.
Is that that's part of the proposal. I think that's also something you can help with, which is by making the certifications more common and more simple, it'll make it much easier for those businesses to succeed.
Yeah, I'll add just a quick comment to that. I think Goldman Sachs and just the program as a whole, as a part, has done a great job at helping us navigate negotiating, contract, compliance, risk, things that come along with a small business that we necessarily don't see on a day-to-day basis because our heads are down and our eyes are on our business. But Goldman Sachs kind of allows us to think about our business in a different way.
Great.
I'd like to add my grandmother was a graduate of Fayetteville State University and a lifelong supporter of HBCUs. And as a result of graduating from the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses, I got an opportunity to do business with a large corporation that now asks, who else are you doing business with as a result of working with us? So they want to see that the Me Too effect works in a positive way. If you can do business with a corporation like a Goldman Sachs, that you're going to actually leverage that opportunity to get experience in other corporations, because if it's working, then other companies want to take advantage of that.
Great, thank you. I tip my hat and shout out to all the HBCUs, and especially those in North Carolina. We have more. Nothing could be finer than to be in North Carolina at an HBCU. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Illinois, who I believe will be our last questioner today, Mr. Snyder, who's a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for having this committee. I want to thank the witnesses for joining us today and sharing your experiences. I am a huge fan of the 10,000 Small Businesses. I had the chance to work with it in Chicago, know many alumni, know what you do, and I'm just grateful for all of that. As my predecessor speaker talked about colleges, I'm going to do my one little pitch and take that prerogative. As an industrial engineering graduate of Northwestern University, it's good to have you here and see your success, but also as a graduate of Kellogg, to have two Northwestern people here is remarkable, but I also have to give credit to the purple tie, since even though you didn't go to Northwestern, we've got the trifecta. But no, this is an important program, and Ms. Johnson-Cope, I want to start with you because your story caught my attention. Third-generation business?
Yes, that's correct.
So you went to school, you studied engineering. Did you know when you went to college that you would come back and work in this business?
When I went to college, I knew I wanted to be a boss, but I didn't think that I would come back to run the family's business. And what I found is in a lot of second and third generation potential business owners, the invitation isn't there to come and help run the business because we see business differently than the previous generations have. And so one of the recommendations I've made to SBA Administrator McMahon is to maybe look at how we can create SCORE to engage younger people and encourage them to go into entrepreneurial ventures, particularly for family-owned businesses, because I know it's something that I didn't necessarily think about, but once I stepped into my role, it seemed very natural.
And just for to convey my bias, I spent much of my career consulting to family-owned businesses and working in family business, and my wife's in a family business. I think the advantage, and Mr. Trongen, you pointed to something about communities, the fact that small businesses, and I'll add family businesses, are important for resilience and the resourcefulness of communities. I think we need to make sure we continue to push that forward. Having been in a third-generation business, and Mr. Foster, I'll come to you next on this because it's a different experience, but for Ms. Johnson-Cope, how has the 10,000 small business experience, the classroom program dealing with other people who may have started businesses, different experiences than you, how has that affected your approach to business? Ms. Johnson-Cope first.
So we all cook at home, right? So it's
No.
You don't even make toast? So it's one thing to try to cook at home based on what you've watched someone before you do. It's another thing to go to culinary school and learn how to do it professionally. And so the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program actually gave me context to what I had watched growing up. And then it taught me how to leverage the experience I had gained working for other businesses outside of my family business and to actually lead my firm, because the jobs that I had didn't teach me how to be a CEO. Because if I had waited until I had worked my way up through IBM, where I previously worked, it would have been 20-some years before I would have been CEO, if that, right? And so the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program actually gave me a shorter runway to pick up the skills that I needed to lead and actually be the CEO of a company, to grow the business, and to make decisions on a high level that I wouldn't have that opportunity to do had I been working for someone else or had I been trying to figure out those skills on my own.
Very wonderful. All right, Mr. Foster, your experience, 'cause you said you came from New York. I lived in New York. Doing investment banking, okay. But very different experiences than going back home and starting a business, with a friend as a partner, which I imagine sometimes strains friendship and sometimes strengthened it. How has this affected what you're trying to do?
From the 10,000 small business standpoint, you know, as she said, it really shortened that runway. And for me, it reinforced all the things that I had been experiencing prior to joining the program. And also, as I mentioned earlier, just the community of folks to leverage within my cohort was second to none, because you know, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And when you're in business and you're going through trying to win contracts, trying to manage employees, you're just doing it as you think you should do it, right? And then going through the program and then coming out of the program, I just had so much of a stronger toolkit behind me. And so that's how it's helped me.
Right. Great. And I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to ask a rhetorical question of Mr. Strong, but something you said in your submitted testimony that I think is really important. And it's the statistic that between 1977 and 2007, so a 30-year period, projections for small business startup and development, there's 675,000 quote-unquote missing businesses. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. We've talked about some of them here, but promoting a culture of entrepreneurship, helping young people understand that they can be their own boss, they can pursue their own dream. And I think our role, you know, I say all the time, there's 4 things needed for success: a business model, you guys are responsible for that, and Goldman is helping with that, but access to capital, access to talent, and a stable and conducive business environment. That we all have to work together. Congress has to do its part. But promoting that and trying to fill that gap, because if we're going to continue to grow our economy, whether it's after recovery of difficult places, in communities that are trying to turn around, having lost major companies, or just in general looking at a new economy developing every decade, we need to promote a strong startup culture and give the people in those businesses the skills. So let me close and say thank you to Goldman Sachs for doing this program. It is a fabulous program, and thank to both of our witnesses from experience. You did a great job. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen's time has expired, and we want to thank our panel here this morning and now this afternoon for really excellent testimony. I think it was a very enlightening discussion, great questions from the folks up here on both sides, and great answers from you all. So hopefully we can replicate much of what you've accomplished across the country and have more and more small businesses created all over America, and and thrive and get the American economy booming. So thank you very much for participating in this today. I would ask that unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there's no further business to come before the committee, other than Happy Valentine's Day, everybody, the committee is adjourned. Thank you.